What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. We're coming to you after the Cavs defeated the Boston Celtics 115-111 on Sunday night. And Chris, obviously there is a lot of anticipation coming into this game for multiple reasons, obviously dating back to the Eastern Conference semifinals and then looking into the future when it comes to the two teams that could face off in this year's playoffs. Obviously the Cavs looking at the Boston Celtics as the main team that could halt them from reaching the NBA Finals. Chris, this is a game that had a lot of different implications, and it had some different things go on before the game even started. Obviously, Jaylen Brown and Derek White both out for the Boston Celtics, then Dean Wade and Max Strus still being out for the Cleveland Cavaliers. What did you take away from this game? What were you looking at, and what did you see that kind of caught your eye when it comes to this matchup?
Yeah, Ethan, I think we have to be careful on this one just because of what was missing from the Celtics. It's not a true test. It's not an honest assessment of the Cavs versus the Celtics. But for this particular game, I wanted to see Darius Garland bounce back. He was terrible in the first meeting against the Celtics. He struggled against the Celtics at various points throughout the course of his career. Two of his four worst shooting nights in his entire career have come against the Celtics. Their physicality, their length, their toughness, their switchability, their size, all of that in the past has bothered Darius. It bothered him last year in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Now, part of that series was played without Donovan Mitchell. The final game was played without Karis LeVert, no Jarrett Allen to kind of create space for him and free him up with those screens. But in that series against the Celtics, when Darius needed to be a little bit better and step forward based on the absences that the Cavs had, he wasn't able to do it. And Drew Holiday has given him problems in the past. Derek White, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. And it's clear that the Celtics hunt him relentlessly, mercilessly. If the Cavs are going to continue to switch, the Celtics are going to consider that an advantageous matchup. So, Darius goes into these games against the Celtics with a target on his back. And as bad as he was in the first meeting between the two teams, I wanted to see how he was going to respond. I wanted to see if he was going to be able to bounce back. I wanted to see what kinds of things he learned in the first matchup against the Celtics that he could benefit from, that he could improve on. And I thought Darius had a really, really good game, and I thought that was a significant development for the Cavs. I was also watching to see how the Cavs were going to set up their defense and what kinds of things they were going to focus on when playing against the Celtics. Were they going to give up 50 threes? Were they going to give up 22 made threes against the Celtics? Were they going to change some things, maybe even overreact to the first meeting between the two teams? I think you can evaluate those things independently and somewhat honestly, while also admitting that the Celtics were woefully shorthanded and they were playing without two all-star caliber players. And there were various points throughout the course of Sunday's game that it was a bad sign for the Cavs, that they were getting dominated and they were losing by double digits to the Celtics B team, the Celtics C team, the team that's probably not the one that the Cavs are going to see when May comes around.
And Chris, you mentioned a lot of different things in that, right? Like starting with Darius Garland. The thing that you mentioned that we really wanted to see coming into the season was, can Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland hold up against these top tier teams on the defensive end, right? And Kenny Atkinson said it after the game. He is no longer going to hide Darius Garland the way that J.U. Bickerstaff might have last season and in previous years. He is going to allow him to get hunted by opposing teams and then showcase that he's not going to be able to be pushed around the same way that he had in the past. Jason Tatum, like you said, relentlessly attacked Darius Garland in switches, all these different things. There were two possessions in particular where you saw Darius Garland kind of wall up and be able to contest when it comes to JT, who is significantly taller, stronger, bigger than Darius Garland. And when you talk about what Darius has gone through last season, what he's been able to do in the offseason, he mentioned it a lot in his post-game press conference, like he is going to stay in the gym. for these moments because he understands that these teams are going to come at him and he doesn't want to be a liability on defense. Then you switch it around to the offensive end, Chris, and he had a majority of the scoring in the first half. Kenny Atkinson said it again. He was one of the only guys being consistent in the first half. And it kind of makes it easier for Darius and Donovan because you talk about when Darius mentioned it after the game that Donovan had missed 2 free throws, and we know how mad he can get when he misses shots, let alone free throws, which, as he knows and as he's mentioned, they're free. You have to make them. That something changed in Donovan Mitchell heading into that second half. And as we know, as the story unfolded, he had 30 points in that second half, 20 coming in the fourth quarter. He flipped the switch. He was attacking. He was getting mismatches. And in that fourth quarter, he was 6 of 6 from the field and 4 of 4 from three-point range. So, Chris, when it comes to MVP Donovan, those conversations, this was another night that he showcased why he should be in those conversations, right?
Yeah, I think so. For the final 2 quarters, as Ty Jerome said, Donovan was playing some terrible basketball for the previous 7 quarters. But I think the beauty of Donovan Mitchell, the reason why he is the superstar that he is he doesn't get fazed by that stuff. He doesn't let it bother him. Who cares if he went 5 of 23 or whatever it was in Atlanta on Friday? Who cares if he went 2 of 8 from the field in the first half against the Celtics? He understands his role on this team is to do what's necessary for them to win. And I think he saw an opportunity late in the third quarter, going into the fourth quarter, and he just told himself, look, I got to put my imprint on this game by scoring. I've got to find a way to get my own shots, create my own offense, put a charge into this arena, put a charge into this team. And we've talked about this so many different times over the last couple of years, Ethan. When Donovan has it going, it gives his teammates confidence. It gives this team a different aura. And you can sense it when Donovan's making those clutch threes, when he's making those go-ahead layups, when the crowd is into it and he's signaling for the crowd to get into it. There's just a different feeling around this team. There's a different level of belief. There's a different level of hope. And I think when you have a player like Donovan Mitchell and you understand what he's capable of, no matter how the first quarter goes, no matter how the first half goes, no matter how the previous 2 games go, when you have that guy on your side, you're going to have an opportunity. At least you feel like you're going to have an opportunity, that the goals that you have to win a championship aren't unrealistic, because he's capable of things that he did tonight, where he completely flipped the game in the fourth quarter. He outplayed Jason Tatum in the decisive fourth quarter. He outdueled him. And Donovan's capable of outdueling Trae Young, Jason Tatum, Giannis, Damian Lillard, Jalen Brunson, any of those guys that you talk about that can shift a series or can shift a game. Donovan is equally capable of doing that. And he showed that tonight. And I like the fact that he recognized what the team needed going into the fourth quarter. And he's like, I'm not taking a step back anymore. I'm not initiating offense. I'm not creating for others. I'm going into attack mode. And he did. And he put the team on his back. And he rebounded from, even Kenny Atkinson was like, it's baffling to me that he can be that bad at the beginning of the game and start that poorly and just not have it bother him at all and stay confident and continue to trust his work and continue to trust himself and just flip it. And that's what happened. And when you have a guy that's capable of that, it's really, really meaningful, especially in end of game situations like tonight.
And you talk about level-headedness, Chris. Like, Kenny Atkinson talked about how the coaching staff was on a roller coaster ride when it comes to their emotions throughout the game. And yet, even keeled was Donovan Mitchell. Even keeled was his presence even when he was struggling in that first half. right? Can we understand how powerful that is as a leader because it can
Mm-hmm.
uplift everybody else around him, right? You have Tristan Thompson and George Niang, the yappers on the sideline that are going to keep the energy high and all those different things, but they're not on the court. They're not playing to that caliber, all those different things. So it's different when Donovan Mitchell is able to do that, good and bad. And we've seen it all year when it comes to him talking after the games. It could be the 15th game of a 15-0 winning streak, and he's going to say that they need to work on some things. Or it could be after a night where they come back and beat the reigning NBA champions, and he says that they have stuff to work on, right? And
Mm-hmm.
speaking of those things to work on, we talked a lot about the defense coming into this game, the defense coming into the last couple of games, and how there were slippages and all these different things. Starting off, obviously, they allowed a whopping 35 points to 21 points in the third quarter that looked like it could have been shifting the game. Kenny Atkinson said, "Oh, it could have been woe is us when it comes to
Yeah.
after that third quarter." But yet they held Kristaps Porzingis and Jason Tatum to 8 combined points in the fourth quarter. And Joe Mazzulla, who is not known for giving praise to any other team, gave praise a little bit to the Cavaliers defense, especially going into the zone in the last minute of the game. Chris, I wanted to pick your brain on obviously the entire fourth quarter, but especially going into the foul situation where Kenny Atkinson was like, screw it, we're going to start fouling when it's like 17, 20 minutes left on the clock to create still create a lead while they were up by 3 points.
Okay, so before that, Ethan, I think this is an important note when it comes to the Cavs Celtics potential matchups moving forward. And this is now back-to-back games that the Cavs have tried doing a specific strategy on the defensive end of the floor. In the first game, it didn't work because they didn't get the result that they wanted, but it kind of worked because they limited the number of threes. Well, in the Cavs definition, because the Celtics didn't reach their number, their season number for average threes in a game, it kind of worked. Like the Cavs are switching almost everything against the Celtics when they're not in their zone defense. And they just threw that wrinkle out there late in the game. And you mentioned it. It did kind of take the Celtics out of their rhythm. But Boston was out of their rhythm before that because the Cavs are switching a lot against the Celtics. I would say a majority of the game. And in many ways, that is a trap. It is a trap. It is a strategy to keep the Celtics from moving the ball, sharing the ball, getting everybody involved. And it's almost baiting Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and some of these other guys, Jaylen in the first game between the two teams. He didn't play tonight because he was ill. It's baiting these guys into an isolation-heavy approach. Are they capable? Of course. It's Jason Tatum. It's Jaylen Brown. But it takes them out of their usual rhythm. It limits the number of threes that they're going to get. Because Jason Tatum is not going to settle for a bunch of threes and move the ball and share it and have that kind of rhythmic offense when he sees a perceived mismatch against Darius, against Ty Jerome, against Donovan Mitchell. It's the same thing when it comes to Jaylen Brown. These guys are going to hunt. In this case, they're going to hunt Darius Garland, who they believe is the weak link. And there are going to be times that Darius is going to get scored on. And he's going to get bullied because he's 6'1", and he's like 195 pounds. And he doesn't have the size or the length of Jason Tatum. But it becomes a math equation in some cases. Like, yeah, you're scoring these tough twos. You're scoring in the post, but it's not Sam Hauser getting an open three. It's not Peyton Pritchard getting an open three. It's not Al Horford getting an open three from the corner. It becomes a little bit of a math equation. And we talked in the Eastern Conference semifinals last year that the math equation was not favorable to the Cavs because they were giving up too many threes to the Celtics. In the first game between the two teams, the Cavs kind of like overreacted. They overhelped. They were in rotation. They were scrambling around on defense. And the Celtics had a little bit more freedom within the offense. And look, part of this is they didn't have Derek White, who takes, close to 10 a game. And they didn't have Jaylen Brown. And the personnel sort of dictated that the Cavs thought this was going to be a successful strategy. But I think they have shown in this particular matchup that they can bait Boston stars into an isolation-heavy approach because they're going to believe that it's advantageous when a 6'1" point guard is guarding Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and even Drew Holiday. And that's fine. The Cavs are fine with that, though, too. That's the thing. Like, after the game, and part of it is because the end result, right? But the other part of it is because, Darius toughened up and he took on that challenge. And the Cavs, to their credit, didn't overreact to Jason Tatum hitting these fadeaways over Darius Garland or plowing through Darius on his way to the basket. They were like, this works for us. We're okay with this. And it did. And I just think it's a really, really fascinating thing to continue to watch in this particular matchup. Because as much as Boston thinks it's advantageous for them to do this, the Cavs are looking at it saying, well, this is advantage us too.
And obviously 2 is less than 3, so that's one of the main purposes of that. The other is the amount of time it takes off the clock, right? Because obviously, as Darius put it after the game, he's no punk. So even if Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown want to try and blow through him, they're potentially going to have to still try and back him down, which takes more time off the clock, time that they would have used to get easy, quicker shots if the ball is moving faster around the court. So if you're taking more time off, that leads to less shot opportunities for the Celtics and creates a different shot profile, as Chris mentioned as well. So it's a little bit of multiple different aspects that create difficulties for the Cavs. Chris, the other thing that I wanted to mention about what the Cavs and the Celtics had to go through, which was different from last season and last playoffs, because Donovan Mitchell mentioned after the game, this felt a little bit like Game 3 of the Eastern Conference semifinals last year. It felt like it was slowly getting out of hand, and there were 2 ways that the Cavs could have gone. They could have folded, and they could have rolled over, seemingly like they did last year, or they could punch back, get back into it. And one of the wrinkles that we obviously didn't get to see as much last season, if at all, was Kristaps Porzingis, who we know to be a cheat code for Boston. And it was interesting for me to see how Joe Mazzulla operated, especially on the defensive end for them, and who they had guarding. Because they had Al Horford and Kristaps in the starting lineup, and then split them kind of the same way that the Cavs do with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. What do you think about how the Cavs were able to distribute their defensive effort on Kristaps, who was able to, like Michael Porter Jr. said, I believe it was last season, just shoot over people, even if it's from 30 feet away, because you're not at the same height. I believe he's 7'3", talking about Kristaps, and how they kind of counteracted that, obviously leading him just scoring 4 points and being over in the final quarter. All 4 of his points came from the free throw line.
Well, again, I think what happened in the fourth quarter was largely dictated by the Cavs' overall defensive strategy of daring and baiting Jason Tatum and the Celtics into an ISO-heavy approach. So, those 4 shots from Porzingis, were they coming in rhythm? Were they coming in the flow of the offense? How spread out were they in terms of how often he touched it throughout the course of a possession or throughout the course of that fourth quarter? And I think Porzingis, the problems that he creates for the Cavs, it's not just Cavs specific. If anything, having the agility, the mobility of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen gives the Cavs more of a fighting chance against Porzingis and the space-heavy Celtics than some of these other teams. But Porzingis is going to continue to be a problem for this team. He is the cheat code. And when they have Derek White and Jaylen Brown also in that lineup, and they don't have to play some dude that I've never heard of named Drew Peterson. 25 freaking minutes. 25 minutes this guy played. Coming into the game, I think he played less than 10.
We'll probably never talk about again on this podcast. Drew Peterson from the Boston Celtics, who's on a two-way contract, he had played 30 minutes total in his NBA career. So that's what I was saying. He had 7 minutes this season, I think is what you were referring to. And he played 25 minutes tonight and then actually played decently. But again, I don't think when Drew Holiday, Derek White, they have their regular starting lineup along with Jaylen Brown, I don't think you're going to be hearing Peterson's name called out or talked about. That's why it was such a bigger story from tonight's game. But
he's not a guy who's going to be in their rotation. He's not a guy who is in their rotation. But like the Celtics had to go that way because of this particular matchup and because of who they were missing. So I do think we have to put this win for the Cavs in perspective. All of this conversation is always going to be nuanced, just like the Cavs are missing Max Strus and Dean Wade, and the things that they can do at both ends of the floor are different when those guys are out there. The way that the Celtics operate when Derek White and Jaylen Brown surround Kristaps Porzingis as opposed to this dude named Drew Peterson and some of the other guys that they were playing throughout the course of the game, like Sam Hauser's probably not going to get 37 minutes most nights. So I think that helped with the Cavs defensively against Porzingis, but it was pretty clear in the fourth quarter that he just wasn't comfortable and he wasn't in rhythm. And they did some smart things, the Cavs, in the fourth quarter. And they made more plays than the Celtics in the fourth quarter. And that was very different from the first meeting between the two teams.
And we talked a little bit about how this was different from Game 3 of last year, which is what Donovan Mitchell referenced. And it's a game that he was looking back on, apparently, ahead of tonight's game. And one of the main differences was Isaac Okoro was actually able to knock down shots in crucial moments or be able to play in a different role than he has previously. He was used in the half role. He was used as a screener. Yeah. All these different things that Kenny Atkinson has tried to utilize him to get him involved. And when you talk about because he was in the corner at times this game, and he made 2 threes, one including in the fourth quarter, which was a big one. And while being guarded by Al Horford last season, they came in, the Boston Celtics did, with the same mindset today and had Al kind of guarding Isaac. But with Isaac being used as a screener, it forced Al Horford to then be switched on to Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell. And that created different opportunities for them off the dribble as well. So it's a double-edged sword for Isaac Okoro's growth, being able to be used and utilized in a different role that creates opportunities that are advantageous for the ball handlers of the group while also knocking down threes. And when we talk about Isaac Okoro's offensive rating from last season in the playoffs, especially against the Boston Celtics, I believe it was around 82, which is horrid, right? And then you talk about what he's being able to contribute this year on the offensive end as a shooter, as a roller, all these different things. He's up to 44.4% coming into tonight's game from three-point range, which is great, which is another career high if the season were to end tonight. So continuing to see him grow, how important, especially with Max Strus and Dean Wade out, and before I go on to that and ask you this next question, I think the offensive rating when it comes to Isaac, Jared Allen, and Evan Mobley on the floor, which is crazy to think about with these two offensive bigs or non-shooting bigs, is the second rated offensive rating when it comes to the Cavs in players and groupings of 3 that have played over 100 minutes together thus far this season. And for him to take that growth and kind of elevate that group as well, I think it's significant. But what do you think it means for how the Cavs are going to be able to use him going forward, and especially with Max Strus and Dean Wade out, how important he's been?
Ethan, I think it's going to correct itself, honestly. I think teams are going to continue to play the percentages when it comes to Isaac. And if he's out there and he's surrounded by Darius and Donovan, they're going to use that extra defender and they're going to shade that person toward Darius or Donovan, or they're going to shade that person toward Evan Mobley or Jared Allen to try and make their catches more difficult, keep them off the glass, and it's just going to be up to Isaac to make them pay. And some nights he's been able to do that, and other nights he hasn't been. So I think he's just going to be that kind of player for the Cavs. But if he continues to shoot with confidence, if he continues to make these teams pay for that kind of strategy, if he continues to bring the toughness and the edge on the defensive end of the floor, it's going to be easier for Kenny to count on him and continue to go to him. But if he's not doing those things, if he's not providing enough of an impact on the defensive end of the floor, then I think as Max Strus gets healthy, as Dean Wade gets healthy, it's going to be easier for Kenny to lean into those guys a little bit more. Max is not the defender that Isaac is. I think everybody can understand that. But he's tough. He's physical. He competes as well. And Dean is a comparable defender to Isaac. And there's just more attention paid to those kinds of players than Isaac. And there's more spacing out there for the Cavs when those guys are on the floor as opposed to Isaac. A reputation is hard to shake. And even though Isaac is shooting a really good percentage from 3-point range, and he went 2 for 2 tonight against the Celtics, and he hit a really, really big one in the fourth quarter, and it was meaningful. I just don't see this in terms of a strategy from a defense. I just don't see evidence of they're all that worried about it. I mean, at times they just went under a screen and they just let Isaac shoot it. And Al Horford tried to get in position for a rebound instead. He didn't even bother to contest. So, a longtime executive told me a while ago, Ethan, that defensive strategy is not often dictated by percentage. It's dictated by reputation and by volume. And there's a clear reputation that Isaac has, and he's going to have to continue to make these shots, make these defenses pay, to change that reputation. And tonight, he was able to do that against the Celtics, hitting 2 big timely threes, and good for him. That shows if he continues to do that, like, it's going to instill confidence in his teammates to go to him in those moments. It's going to give him the confidence to pull the trigger in those moments. It's going to give Kenny Atkinson the confidence to get him on the floor in those minutes. But when Dean and Max come back, I think Isaac is going to slide back, and it may not happen immediately if these guys are on minute restrictions, if these guys need a ramp-up period. But I think you're going to see Isaac slide back into a lesser role in this rotation when those guys come back, because both of them are a better fit. And, Max is a clearly better player, and Dean provides a different element than Isaac does on the offensive end. We'll just put it that way.
I think it's also interesting to talk about players coming back and how rotation minutes kind of shift, because we saw how great Ty Jerome was to begin the season, how great he's been in the last week and a half, and then he doesn't get to play a whole lot against the Boston Celtics. And we obviously can look back at that first matchup where he didn't have the best game against them and all these different things. But Sam Merrill was 1 of 5 and still got the opportunity to go out there and continue to be attacked, continue to all these different things. And it feels like, because of the gravity that we talk about so heavily on this podcast, that was the main difference when it came to putting Ty versus Sam out. And sure, you can look at the numbers and say, hey, Ty Jerome might be shooting a better percentage. I would have to look at these numbers to confirm. But that might have been the reason that Kenny Atkinson went with Sam instead of Ty, because he just draws more people, more eyes. And the Celtics, who have played them before, have known and have to respect what Sam is able to do.
And I think to your point about Ty Jerome and Sam Merrill and Dean Wade to a lesser extent, and even Isaac Okoro, like, I just think it's the reality of the situation. We've talked about this so many different times, Ethan. Everybody has a specific role on this team, and some guys it's going to be predicated on the matchup. Some guys, it's going to be predicated on game flow. Some guys, it's going to be predicated on how they're playing in that game, how they're playing leading into that game. And that's just the life of a role player, right? And that's part of what comes with being Isaac Okoro as opposed to Donovan Mitchell. Like, your minutes just aren't going to be consistent, right? Opportunities aren't going to be as vast. And it's just something that Isaac has to deal with. Craig Porter Jr. has to deal with. Sam Merrill has to deal with. In some instances, it's going to be, yeah, we need the shooting, we need the spacing, we need the movement that Sam brings to the table. In other cases, Kenny Atkinson might say, hey, like, we need the defense plus the size plus the rebounding capability of Dean Wade a little bit more than what we need from Isaac Okoro. And it doesn't mean that just because that happens one game in one matchup, that it's going to be the same moving forward, or it's going to stay that way for the duration of the season. There are 6 guys on this team that have locked in concrete roles. Nothing is going to change that. And that's Darius, that's Donovan, it's Max Strus when he comes back from an injury, it's Evan Mobley, it's Jared Allen, and it's Karis LeVert. Other than that, like, the role is going to be the same. The rotations are going to be sort of the same, but there's going to be a level of fluctuation within that, if that makes sense.
And the last thing I wanted to talk about on today's podcast is Evan Mobley, right? Because he didn't have the best game he's had in a long time, right? This was definitely, it wasn't good. And we came into the game remembering what happened in the game 5 of last year's playoffs. We remembered how he was able to kind of take into that limelight and get into what we consider his evolution, his beginning of that. But tonight he was bad. He had 2 points through 3 quarters. And then, Chris, in the fourth quarter, he had 7 points on 3 of 4 shooting, and was able to kind of get back into a rhythm and help out the Cavs when they needed it most. What do you take away from his performance? I know we don't want to be too recency bias. Like, if you're talking about this was a bad game or he was able to come back in the fourth quarter, it feels like this can't be taken too far into account just because of how good he's been all season.
You're right about that. No doubt. At the same time, I'm going to keep monitoring. Not from the standpoint of, is he going to bounce back Tuesday against the Washington Wizards? But how does the Kristaps Porzingis factor, how does that tie into how Evan Mobley plays in this particular matchup against the Celtics? I don't know the answer. I don't. I think we're still learning that. Porzingis wasn't there in the series in the Eastern Conference semifinals. He wasn't there in the first meeting between the two teams on November 19th. But stylistically, it's logical to think that it's going to be tougher on Evan when it's Porzingis guarding him instead of old man Horford, right? I think stylistically, it's logical to say that it's going to be a little bit more difficult for Evan to look as comfortable, as confident when it's Porzingis guarding him as opposed to Sam Hauser in downsized lineups, something like that. So I do think it's something that we have to continue to monitor. I don't think you make sweeping declarations. I don't think you make definitive conclusions based on this one game and say, well, the thing that was different is that Porzingis was out there, and that's why Evan had the game that he had. Maybe that's part of it. Again, still learning that, still monitoring that. Logic would say that had something to do with it. At the same time, Evan's still a young player that is going through a different role, going through different responsibilities. Sometimes he plays center by himself. Sometimes he's out there with Jared Allen. Sometimes he's going to be a heavy focal point on the offensive end of the floor get the ball in the post, get the ball at the elbow extended. Other times he's going to be a screener and roller or play out of the dunker. You know what I mean? So I think this is all part of the evolution of Evan Mobley. And I think one bad game, the thing that I'll say when it comes to Evan is like part of the reason why you talk about one bad game with Evan and you start wondering about it is because it doesn't happen all that often. He's been so good at the beginning of this year for the Cavs. So I'm willing to say, give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here, to say that it doesn't feel like a bad sign moving forward, or Porzingis is his kryptonite and Evan can't possibly be effective in this particular matchup in a 7-game series. Like, I'm not there yet, but it's a mental note that I'm making to pay attention to.
And Chris, you talk about kryptonite. The Cavs were able to beat the Boston Celtics without the Celtics killer and Dean Wade. And I want to wrap this podcast up just by giving us a brief injury update, basically what we have from the pregame presser. Dean Wade is apparently, according to Kenny Atkinson, he said he would not bet that he will play in Tuesday's game against the Washington Wizards, and there still is no timetable for Max Strus's return. But
there's a lot of confusion on this front, though, Ethan. There is a lot of confusion, and there are people that are close to Dean Wade that heard those comments from Kenny Atkinson tonight, and they were like, "Oh, really? He's not playing Tuesday against the Wizards? Curious." Because I'm told that Dean wanted to play tonight against the Celtics. And Dean went through a workout yesterday at the practice facility, and then he went through another workout tonight before the game to do everything that he could do. When he was walking, he didn't have a noticeable limp. So I think there's a little confusion on this front on when Dean is going to be back, because there was some internal hope and some belief that this was going to be the game for him, that there was going to be a chance that he was going to be able to play against the Celtics. I think the wrinkle here is that Kenny feels like Dean needs a contact practice before he gets a level of clearance, or before the Cavs are comfortable putting Dean back into a game environment. And the Cavs were going to practice on Saturday. They did not. And we know this about them. Practices are not a guarantee. When you've got this condensed schedule, when you've got this kind of team, practice days turn into recovery days, or get what you need kind of days, or individual workout type days, because they have to navigate this grueling schedule. They played 17 games in the first 29 days. And even though it's been a little bit more relaxed recently, even though there's been more breaks in the schedule recently, they're entering a week where, once again, they're playing every other day, basically. So Kenny Atkinson has to ask himself, do we have a full contact practice on our off day, our quote-unquote off day? Or do we make that a recovery day? What's more beneficial for us? And I think because Saturday turned into not a full practice, not a contact practice, and Kenny's belief that that's what Dean needs as kind of like the final hurdle in this recovery, that kind of like changed some things, and what Kenny would have been comfortable with from Dean, and what the training staff would have been comfortable with from Dean. And I wonder, this is just me thinking out loud, I wonder if Kenny said what he did in pregame about, I don't expect it to be Tuesday night. I wonder if that's because Kenny went into this game knowing that the schedule was what it was, and believing that Monday was going to be an off day, no practice for the Cavs, as opposed to a practice day. So I don't know. Injuries are always fluid. We know that much. And this one in particular, if Kenny is going to look at this and say, he needs a full contact practice, and the schedule does not allow a full contact practice, or Kenny doesn't believe that the schedule allows a full contact practice, then this absence could drag out a little bit longer than what the belief was a couple of days ago.
Right. And for those that are like kind of getting reminded of the conversation we had with Dean Wade saying that he wanted to come back in the Boston Celtics series in the playoffs last year when he was like, quote unquote, ready to come back for game 2 and then ended up coming back for game 3, 4, and 5. Like, that's a little bit different because like Dean Wade wanted to come back and was not ready to come back. Should probably not have come back that entire playoff series because he was playing on one leg. Came back and said, there's a couple tears and stuff in here. The difference between that and this is Dean is the only thing keeping Dean from playing, allegedly, is that he needs a contact practice, right? And like Chris said, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, that's the schedule for the games this week. That's a little bit tougher. And also for fans that are asking for or wanting to know more on Max Strus, so do we. Like, the reevaluation period ended on Saturday. There hasn't been an official release. There hasn't been anything on the back door about what Max Strus has been doing. He was at the game tonight, always wearing his hat. You didn't see him in a boot. Like, all we can do is report on what we see until we get told something different, right? So Max Strus, being a guy that Kenny Atkinson said it was still a couple ways away a couple days ago, might allege to think that it might be a week or so before he gets back. And we said this when the injury began, when the injury happened, that it might be longer than that first 6 weeks before Max Strus was ready to come back. But for listeners that want to contribute to a survey about the podcast where you can give your feedback, go to tinyurl.com/WGpod. That's tinyurl.com/WGpod. And with that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. If we get any news on Max Strus or Dean Wade, this is where you're going to get it first, before Twitter or X or before Instagram, wherever platform you're at. Subtext is where you're going to get the information first. So sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.